Greetings, viewers. Eric the Car Guy here, back again with another live show where I sometimes butcher your names and answer your automotive questions. So I apologize for that name thing in advance. A few things I want to cover at the onset here. I'm taking the questions from the Google Plus live event. There's links to my Google Plus page, and that's where you go to post the questions. If you're posting questions to the YouTube video, especially after the fact, I cannot see those questions, and unfortunately I will not be able to answer them. But we are not without hope. There is always EricTheCarGuy.com, the new and improved EricTheCarGuy.com. We got a new server. Everything's fast, wonderful, and awesome. You can have it over there 24/7, 365, and there's the FAQ page that can help you. That's got plenty of topics that I often get asked about. If you can't find anything there and you're looking for specific answers, I'd ask that you head over to the Eric the Car Guy forum and post your question there. I go and answer questions there along with a lot of other very smart people who are willing to help. It's all a good thing. So you have options. However, if you posted your question to this live event, I will do my level best to try and get to that today. And a couple of things. My t-shirt? Yeah. And if you've ever wondered about these stuffed animal things behind me, my wife makes those. She knits them. So it's kind of her little way of being famous on my shows. But enough about all of that. I think we should really start answering these questions that you have posted. And that's what we're here for. So, well, let's get started. Oh, and by the way, I probably should have checked this. This is the 23rd. The one the next show is going to be, I do these every other week. So if I miss you this week, I'll catch you on the next show. In the description, there'll be a ton of additional information, including things that I talk about here. So if you have questions about stuff that went on during the show or I referred to something, check the description. I put links and stuff down there. I spend a lot of time in the description of all of my videos. So whenever you have questions, check the description. It might just be there. Just a click away. John Tarantino, hi Eric, love the show. I have an '05 Suzuki Verona. I need to replace the passenger side drive shaft. The automatic transmission is self-contained with no dipstick. If I pull out the old drive shaft, will any transmission fluid leak out? If it does, I have no way to add fluid. Want to say thanks for responding to me on one of your last episodes. I was stuck, and your tips helped me big time. Awesome, stay dirty. Okay, I looked this up. I don't know specifically on this model. I haven't done it. But the labor times were really the only thing I could find, and they were just a little over an hour. That seems about right for axle replacement. It doesn't seem like there's any additional things in there. I'm saying you're probably okay, and I can only say probably. I wish I could give you a better answer. What I would suggest to you is maybe call the dealer and ask them. Say, hey, when I pull these axles out, is there fluid that comes out? And if they won't talk to you, call another dealer. Some of them are very friendly and nice, and others are, hey, bring your car to us, stop taking money out of our pocket. Ignore those people and try to find somebody else. I wish I had that answer for you. I apologize for not having it for you, but as far as I can see from, like I said, the labor times for doing that, which is how much time they allot, how much time that a shop can get paid for doing that job, that's what they put, and it was just a little more than an hour in all the cases that I could find. So that says to me that it's probably not some weird thing that you have to deal with. Probably. I wish I could give you a better answer. Apologies. Matt Bono has, his sister has a 2000 four-cylinder Camry that has a P0401, code EGR flow insufficient. It seems pretty simple to access and clean the ports on the EGR valve assembly itself, but a bit more complicated for the passages on the intake manifold. I looked at your video from 2009 for this repair on an Accord. It looks like you had removed the top part of the engine and the fuel rail to reach those passages. Not sure how the configuration varies on a Camry, but is there any way to tell if the intake manifold passages are clogged without removing a bunch of pieces? Would a can of seafoam in the intake help unclog the passages when I attempt to recirculate the exhaust gases? Also, is it safe for her or the car to drive for a few weeks until I can make the repair? Thanks for all you do. I've learned so much from your videos over the years. Awesome. Yes to a couple of things here. Yes to finding out if the passages are clogged before you get started. A little test that I like to do with EGR. First, I'll answer the question of, is it safe to drive? Yes, it's safe to drive. It's just, EGR is just going to affect emissions. It shouldn't affect the performance of the vehicle all that much unless it's under hard acceleration driving up hills, maybe a slight hesitation, but it shouldn't stop the vehicle from going where it's going. You should be fine in waiting to address this. When you do address it, what I would suggest you do is take the, well, there's a couple of ways you can go about this. The quick and easy way is just to take your hand and try to pull up on the diaphragm inside the EGR valve. So your fingers can sort of reach through those little openings in the bottom, and if you can push up on that while the engine is running. If the engine stalls at that time, that means those passages probably aren't clogged, and it probably has something to do with the control of that EGR valve. Another thing to do, which is probably even better than my quick and dirty test, is to get a vacuum pump. That's a hand pump that can create a vacuum. It's got a little vacuum line that comes off the end of it. Disconnect the vacuum line from the EGR valve, connect the vacuum pump, and pump it up while the engine is running once again. If it's able to hold vacuum, and if the engine stalls or starts to run really rough, a lot of times is what happens. If it does one of those two things, that means that the passages going to the intake manifold should be unclogged. Should be, I say should be, because I've seen it to where maybe one or two passages gets clogged and there's another couple that do work. But where you try to determine if there's an issue with the control of the EGR valve. And the reason why I say this a couple of times, because there is, I looked this one up too to see if there was a lot of stuff that, things that were common to this. And there's an EGR vacuum modulator, which controls the EGR valve itself, which could be bad. There's also an electronic, let's see, it's electronic controls. A lot of it was the vacuum solenoid valve or the vacuum modulator, one of those two things that I looked up that control that. I don't want to go through a lengthy explanation about how to pick apart those things. It would just be me reading boring stuff. But that quick test that I told you will tell you whether or not you're looking at passages or not. Now, if you have to clean those passages, I don't believe the seafoam thing is going to work. Many times you have to just get down in there and clean them out. I have in the past sometimes gotten a coat hanger down that EGR passage coming out of the EGR, and that's been somewhat successful. But I'll be honest, it's been a bit since I've worked on one of these, so I don't know specifically if that's going to help or not. If they have, I don't know if they have individual passages going into the intake manifold, similar to what that Honda had you mentioned, or if it's just one tube going into the intake and that's that. So, but at least that part of the diagnosis should get you started, so that at least you'll know what you're up against. It could also be if you go and pump that vacuum pump up and the EGR valve doesn't hold a vacuum, then replace the EGR valve. That means it's leaking. It needs to hold a vacuum, and usually vacuum pumps have a little vacuum gauge on them to tell how much vacuum is being delivered. So if you see that needle start to drop immediately when you pump it up, that EGR valve is probably bad. Long way down the list is also O2 sensors that could set that code, but I would start by looking at the EGR valve and its operation and see what you come up with. All right, George Burkhardt has a very long description of his issue. He has a bit of a puzzle. It's a 1995 Accord 4-cylinder manual, 2.2 liter. He recently decided to do some maintenance and all in one shot replace the seals in the cylinder head, camshaft, distributor, valve cover, and the part under the rocker assembly with the O-rings to keep oil from getting into the spark plug wells. Also replaced the timing and balancer belts, and of course water pump. I readjusted the valve lash since I had to take the rocker assembly out to get to the seals beneath. I also replaced the middle section of tailpipe between the cat muffler sections since I had a rattling resonator. After getting everything back together, everything runs okay, but my mileage is worse and the car has an annoying exhaust note from around 1700 RPM. When accelerating hard, I can smell an exhaust smell, which originally made me think the mixture was rich for some reason, but exhaust testing showed high HC, still barely passing at the limit, but low CO and NOx. So I don't think it's actually a rich condition. Revving the engine in neutral results in a bit of pause near 1700 RPM and the engine winds down. It's not a rise, but it makes me think maybe it's actually a bit lean. I checked the vacuum leaks with propane and couldn't find any. However, injecting propane directly into the air box at approximately 2K RPM didn't stall the engine either. It actually made it sound like it was running a bit stronger. I'm thinking of chasing sensors, but I can't believe it would be a problem there since it seems to be related to the repairs I made. Any idea? I know I shouldn't have done all that work at once because now I can't track down the problem. I checked the timing, mechanical and electrical, at least 10 times literally. It's spot on. Triple check the valve lashed, and those are all inspected as well. Any ideas? One interesting note is that I broke one of the spark plugs while removing them and replaced it with one that was supposedly pre-gapped. I found that it was gapped wrong and may have been misfiring for that. Replaced all 4 new NGK plugs, gapped 44 mils as per spec, and the problem persists. Thank you for any advice you can provide. Check intake manifold vacuum pressure, fuel pressure, and both were within spec. Minus 21 of HD vacuum, and 40 to 32 psi fuel without vacuum on the fuel pressure regulator. Compression is good, identical across all cylinders. All right, number one, do not gap NGK spark plugs. And when you get them out of the box, they come with a tube and everything. Do not gap the spark plugs. In fact, most modern spark plugs, you do not want to gap them. The reason is they have a coating on them, very expensive coating, and when you start gapping them, you remove that coating, it's a bad thing. Also, especially with NGK plugs, they are really good about gapping the plugs the way they're supposed to be, so don't do that. Not saying that's what's causing your problem. Reading through, even though you say you check the timing 10 times, I just kept thinking timing every single time. Timing, your distributor's off, something is off timing-wise with something you did. So I would stop chasing rich lean conditions, all that stuff. You're overcomplicating the issue here. I think you need to go back to the basics of your engine and what it is that you changed or affected during the process of doing all this work that caused the problem. Also, valve lash, super tricky. If you don't get it right, it's not right. And I've never really known it to cause a problem like what you're describing here, but what you're describing is timing that's a tooth off somewhere. Plain and simple. Every time I've run into this, the RPM range that you're talking about, everything says timing. 1700 RPM, that's classic balance shaft out of time. So it may not be the timing belt that's out of time. You may have put the balance shaft out. So your balance, there's two timing belts on an engine, and you may have got the balance shaft off. And I think that may be where your problem is, because they usually start to shake around 1700 RPM and don't perform well. So you may have to go a little bit further and take off that lower cover and not just the top cover, checking over and over again. So that's where I'd be looking. Forget about all this other complicated stuff and all the other stuff that you're checking. Keep it simple, stupid with diagnosis, especially if you just did a bunch of work. Anytime you've done a bunch of work to an engine like you have, and you have a problem after you've done that work, you did something. That's the first place you got to point the finger. Either when you put it back together or took it apart or something, didn't connect something correctly. Somewhere in there, there's something you didn't do correctly. Go back over every step, particularly the timing. Check that balance shaft belt and see what you come up with there. Good luck. Andy Pittman, hi Eric. Here's a follow-up question to the last hangout about the RPMS on my 2000 tip around, jumping from 2500 to 3500 while driving. I finally got the transmission code and it was read P0732, gear ratio error. I read online that dirty transmission fluid can cause this. Just wanted to know your thoughts on it and what I should do. It's been a while since the fluid has been changed. Also, how are the LED bulbs on your Vigor holding up? I was planning on upgrading the headlights to LEDs sometime in the near future. Thanks, Andy. Andy, save your money. Don't buy LED bulbs. By the way, the ones in my Vigor are awesome. Save your money because you might need a transmission. And I say this for a couple of reasons. And I believe, I don't remember exactly what your question was, but when you get the PO 732 codes like that, it usually means a transmission. Yes, you could possibly change the fluid in the filter and it could get better, but it also could get a whole lot worse, especially if you haven't changed the fluid in a while. I've written extensively about this on my website in that FAQ section I mentioned earlier about transmission problems. To change or not to change your transmission fluid? I get asked that question a lot. Therefore, I've written an entire article about that very thing, and it basically boils down to it's a crapshoot. You really don't know if it's going to have a positive or a negative effect. But just be prepared. Be prepared to buy a transmission when you do it. I mean, at that point, you know, if you're already experiencing difficulty, if you're already experiencing problems, it may be too late already. It's worth a shot to try and change the transmission fluid. I'm not telling you not to do it. I'm saying, okay, it's worth a shot. But at the end of the day, when you're done changing your transmission fluid and filter, well, maybe filter too on this. When you're done changing that, it's possible it could be game over for the transmission. And as I said, I explain that in detail on my website in that FAQ section. So I wish you the best of luck with that. Nick Engel bought a H23A for replacement because his H22A4 had bad rings. I was taking the intake manifold off. The gasket was bad. It was baked to the head, so I started scraping it off with a razor blade. Midway through, I decided to look up an easier way. Then I realized I had pitted the mating surface a bit. It's not too extensive, but being a replacement, I want it to be as legitimate as possible. Do you think I could get away with using a gasket sealant, or do you think I should take the time to get the head machined? I've taken apart B-series heads, so I'm familiar enough with dual cam heads. I'm just worried about getting the cam timing correct. Do you have any insight on this? I admire everything you've been doing. I love watching your videos. Thanks in advance. Thank you for that, Nick. Okay, I can't see the damage, so I can't say one way or another if it's damaged too far beyond. I don't like using razor blades. I use a gasket tool, a gasket scraper. It's a sharp tool just the same, but you have a lot more control. You don't have a lot of control with a razor blade. Also, you get it caught on something, you can cut yourself pretty good. So I don't recommend razor blades for scraping gasket material off. I've got actually a cheap Craftsman gasket scraper. I've been using it for years. It's served me well. That's what I use. I can't say. I honestly can't say, but I'm not a fan of gasket sealer. If you've watched any of my videos, you know that I'm not a fan of gasket sealer. I'm always let the gasket do the work. So you kind of have to make your own judgment call on this, because I cannot see what you're dealing with. And I hate to leave you like that, but that's the way it is. But I don't recommend using a razor blade for scraping gaskets. How's that? Especially on aluminum surfaces like that cylinder head. But good luck with that. All right, Daniel here we go. Schwantes, I think. Anyway, has a 1999 Grand Marquis. When he turns the wheel about 1/8 of a turn in either direction, it causes a bump feel, which he has to put more effort into overcoming. Example, turn right about 1/8 of a turn, have to overcome the bump. Then another 1/8 turn, still going right, another bump. It does not have a rack and pinion, just a traditional gearbox. Is that the problem? Power steering pump? Thanks for your insight and for your videos. Very rarely are problems of this type power steering pump related. Pump just puts out volume. That's all it does. Supplies whatever, whether it's a steering box like this or a power steering rack. Whenever you have problems like this, it's almost always on the mechanical side of things, not the hydraulic side of things. So I would take a good look at the suspension and check your tie rods, all that stuff, and make sure that your pitman arms, all those things, like lift the wheels up, shake them side to side. Look for loose parts, ball joints also. It could be any number of suspension components not involving the steering box. If all that's tight and you still have the problem, also check your tire pressures. But tire pressures aren't going to cause a condition like what you're talking about here, I don't believe. Therefore, if you still have it, then it's probably steering box related, and you'll probably need to be replaced it. But luckily, I mean, you have one of the most popular vehicles on the planet. It shouldn't be too difficult to find, and it shouldn't be that expensive, because there's probably some rebuilt ones out there that you can get. That's where I would go with that. Casey Krieger, love the channel. Has a quick question about my exhaust. Last winter, everything from the catalytic converter's back fell off. There is about 5 inches of pipe sticking out of each converter. I was wondering, where could I buy the exhaust system and the parts I need? Is there any welding that would be involved, or can I just use clamps? Or I would rather install it myself than have someone else do it. Thanks. Well, Casey, you never told me what kind of vehicle you're dealing with. Therefore, it's almost impossible for me to tell you where to get your exhaust parts or how to go about that. But exhaust work is a mixed bag. Let's put it this way. If it fell off, it's rusty. If it's rusty and you don't have a torch handy when you're working with exhaust like this, I would say don't even bother, because you're going to be spending a whole lot of time trying to deal with rusty fasteners. And without a torch, it's a nightmare. With a torch, once you use a torch to remove rusted up fasteners like that, you never go back to any other way. It's just that simple. And people come to me and say, hey, can I use a propane torch? No. Can I use MAP gas? Maybe. I prefer oxyacetylene, but other people tell me MAP gas works fine. Yeah, you can use that. But I wouldn't even attempt it without some form of heat to try and remove those fasteners, because, as I said, once they're rotted up, that's it, all over. Brian Houlihan, hey Eric, once again, love your show, and thanks for answering my questions, or my last question. You got it right on the nose with the timing belt being loose. Cool. I like validation that what I'm doing here actually does something, so thanks. Anyway, I have one more question. 1993 Acura Integra LS with automatic transmission. My question is, because everyone has been telling me the transmission is going to go out, because when I put it into reverse, it makes a loud grinding noise and won't go into reverse. But all the other gears work perfectly: drive, park, neutral, 2, 3, S3, and S4. I'm thinking the previous owner slammed it in reverse while driving forward, and ground out the reverse gears, but I'm worried it'll go out while my girlfriend is driving it. And is it possible to just replace reverse gears, or do I need to replace the whole transmission? Any input is greatly appreciated, because when it comes to transmissions, I'm dumbfounded, LOL. And I've also tried adjusting the shift cable, thinking it was stretched out, but nothing changed. Don't do that. Don't do that. When you say, yeah, see, that's the thing. When you say the shift cable adjustment is super important. If you get that wrong, you can actually damage the transmission more than it's already damaged. But I'll tell you right now, if you've got those grinding gears, I've run into this before. It happens sometimes with, as you said, people going from reverse to drive without being fully stopped. And it does tend to grind those gears. Hondas use a different type of transmission than most other automatic transmissions. It's a modified manual transmission that's made into automatic. So the parts and the internals are quite a bit different. As far as you going in there and replacing the gears, you'd probably have the same result if you did brain surgery on your girlfriend as you would trying to replace those gears inside those transmissions. They're not for the faint of heart. They're for the experienced people that know what they're doing when they go in there and do that stuff. You would be better off in your case probably finding a salvage transmission and replacing it if you were looking to do it yourself. But those automatics are quite a bit heavier than manuals, so be prepared when that thing comes out. In fact, I'd recommend some kind of adapter for a floor jack to try and hang on to that thing when you pull it out of there. They say your transmission is toast, and I would tend to agree with them. Yeah, you could have somebody go in there and replace that gear, blah, blah, blah. But by the time you're done with all that mess, you could have just bought another transmission, and you could have been done already. Is kind of what I'm getting at. So, yeah. And also, like I said, the adjustment of that shift cable is critical to the operation, because if it's slightly off, it's going to be half in gear, half out of gear. If that's the case, it's going to cause it to slip, burn it up the rest of the way. So it's imperative that that adjustment be correct. And it's a really sensitive adjustment, and I don't recommend that you mess with it all too much. If you can, put it back where you found it to begin with, because that cable is pretty stout. In fact, it's almost like a thick piece of metal, not so much a cable. So it really doesn't stretch or have those problems. At least in my experience, I haven't seen that. I've seen more issues with the switch for the dashboard and everything else not lighting up correctly because of that, and sometimes not coming out of park, or what was it? I can't remember. That electrical switch causes some problem, like not being able to get out of gear or something like that, because it doesn't register that it's in park. But that's another discussion. As far as yours, you might be looking at a transmission most likely, honestly. And always use Honda transmission fluid in a Honda transmission. Always recommend that. All right, 3000 GT Stealth GTO. Talk about 60K maintenance, why certain parts are made to last a certain length of time, and how it has changed over the past 30 years. Okay, I'll briefly touch on this. They aren't made to last a certain length of time because many people far exceed, the replacement interval on like fuel filters or air filters or any of these things. The whole reason why you do a maintenance is to keep things running at an optimal level. They don't design things to only last a certain amount of time. They design things to last as long as possible, but there is maintenance. It's like changing oil. Oil is only going to last a certain amount of time. It's not designed to only last a certain amount of time. It's designed to last as long as possible. So your question is a little bit from the other side of things. Maintenance schedules have been cut and slashed, and parts and things over the past few years. Things that used to be replaced and adjusted and maintained and all that kind of stuff, no longer the case, because they're trying to bring down maintenance costs so they can sell more vehicles. So, things are, in my opinion, I've done videos about this, things going to modular construction so that they don't require maintenance. They're pretty much when they fail, they just get replaced. It seems to be moving in that direction. February, hey, got a good one for you. I will try to explain it the best I can. 2001 Chevy Silverado 2500 HD crew cab long bed, 6.6 Duramax, 260,000 miles. When braking from any speed above 30 miles per hour, the 5 mile per hour to 0, just before a complete stop, I can feel a slight vibration coming through the brake pedal as if it were the ABS. At the time, the steering wheel turns 10 degrees left by itself, sometimes slightly, sometimes violently. I can also hear a noise similar to ABS solenoids testing. I checked over the brakes. They seem fine. No warping and plenty of meat on the pads. Suspension is also solid. No warning lights and no codes. The only issue I can see is the steering linkage in the damper that is weeping. ABS is also working fine. Thanks so much for these live shows. Okay, the fact that, thanks for that really great description too, by the way. The fact that it's not acting up all the time well, it's acting up enough, and it's not setting codes, says to me that the ABS system is probably interpreting that there's an ABS-worthy event to activate the ABS. A little confused as far as why the steering wheel is getting all wonky, but what I'm thinking is, and I read into this a little bit, you may have a problem with one of the sensors, or more specifically, one of the tone rings around the sensors. If they get rusted up or pitted, the way those sensors work, they work on a magnetic field, and that magnetic field being interrupted by each one of the teeth on that tone ring as it comes around. And it knows the distance between each one of those teeth, and it basically counts the time between each one of those teeth, and it calculates a speed based on that time it takes from one signal to the next. And it does this in fractions of a second as you're driving down the road. But it's not just one wheel, it's all four wheels it's looking at. And there's going to be an accounting for a certain amount of variance between wheels because of turning, things like that. Wheel speeds will not be identical across the board, but ABS activates when it sees a rogue signal, so to speak, or it's looking for lockup. It's looking for a no speed signal all of a sudden, and the other three wheels or the other two wheels are working fine. When it sees that, that's when it triggers that event. Remember, all these things are happening within a millisecond. I suspect that somehow one of these sensors is being thrown off. Now, if it were me, and I had a great scan tool where I could look at like waveforms, or even a lab scope where I could look at the waveforms of the ABS sensor outputs as you're turning the wheel or as the wheel is spinning, it's really easy to spot problems like this. Without that special equipment, you're never going to find it with a DVOM, I don't think, especially if the ABS computer is not picking up on it and setting a code for you. So therefore, you can do a good visual inspection. Look at these tone rings and see if there's debris or rust or something like that. And I'm hesitant to say get in there with some sandpaper and try to clean that up. No, I don't think that's, I don't know how good an idea that is, because these are sensitive things, and they're looking for certain, well, if they don't see those signals, and like I said, it's a lot of signals happening very quickly, I don't know if that'll be successful. I've never tried it, but logic says to me that might not be a good idea. It's hard to say where to go with this, but what I would do is I'd try to put my eyeballs on those sensors and those tone rings and see if you see one that's worse off than another, and then sort of take things from there. Outside of that, I wish I could give you more info, but at least I feel I've given you something to start with, or some possible explanation for what is happening there. Okay, Nori Akin, hey Eric, very pleased to be asked in this forum. My cousin had a problem with his Hummer H2 steering feel heavy when in the play when the vehicle is in this stop position. Although the gear P or N, new steering pump, is it nature of this type of vehicle? Thank you for your answer. I'm gathering, based on your question, is that you've got a heavy steering feel from this vehicle, and you've got a new steering pump. And as I said earlier, steering effort a lot of times it's mechanical in nature. The first thing I would check is tire pressure, also the type of tires. I'm sure on something like that, tires are pretty expensive, and if you buy more inexpensive tires, maybe that has something to do with it. If they're underinflated, that could also have something to do with it. Or if there's a problem in the steering linkage, maybe something needs lubrication, maybe something isn't operating correctly. It's difficult to say exactly what's happening there, but do a thorough inspection of the steering components and the suspension just to be sure that there are no issues there, especially safety issues you want to watch out for. If you don't see anything in that sense, and you've already replaced the power steering pump, you may have to look to, I'm not sure if that is I think that is a power steering rack on it. You may want to look to the power steering rack or the mechanical component within that steering system for the source of the problem. February, I know it's cheeky, but I have another question. Come on, man. 1999 Accord V6, 165,000 miles. Steering wheel shakes from 60 to 80, really noticeable at 70. It started happening out of nowhere. It has new disc brake pads in the front. Tires are directional and are the cheapest of cheap brand, and but they have 9/30 seconds tread, and I don't have any abnormal wear. Steering linkage is tight. Wheel bearings don't wobble as usual. 9, 3, 12, 6 o'clock. So in other words, you're shaking the wheel. Could it be the corrosion where the rim contacts the brake disc hat or CV axles? I appreciate your answer. First of all, there's a common misconception that loose suspension components cause vibrations. They do not. They can make them worse, but they do not. Things that rotate cause vibrations. None of those suspension components rotate. Cheap tires on a Honda, worst thing ever. Worst thing ever. Don't do it. Don't. Just save up. Because cheap tires on Hondas are always a losing bet. You don't have the weird wear now, but you will. Mark my words, you will have strange wear on those tires. But I'm not saying those tires are causing the problem. I suspect you have a problem with an inner CV joint based on your description. That speed is indicative of an inner CV joint problem with that vehicle. In fact, I just went through it with a 2005 Odyssey last week. And I replaced the loose axle, and away we go. Now, which one is it, left or right? Good question. Now, the way I make that determination is mostly by feel. I grab the axles and push up and down towards the inner joint and feel for looseness. I'd replace the looser side first. They will always have a little bit of looseness. It just depends. And you also have to know something else about this problem, and you can turn out of it as what I call it. This is how I really diagnose it. If you're having that vibration at 70 and you're going straight down the road and you turn the wheel slightly and that vibration goes away, then it's most likely a inner CV joint problem. And I say this because the inner CV joint is a cup, and the axle fits inside of that cup. And as the suspension moves up and down, I know what you're thinking. As the suspension moves up and down, that joint slips in and out of that cup into different spots. So if there's one spot of that cup that's worn more than the other, there's your vibration. But the minute the suspension compresses and moves that cup to a different location, then it's tighter, it's sealed up, and that vibration goes away. That's why I say that you can sort of steer out of a problem like that. And that's why I look for one that's looser and one that's not. But whenever it's up in the air, the suspension isn't compressed in the same way as it is when you're driving down the roads. Therefore, that inner joint isn't necessarily in the same position it is where it's worn. So it's a guess. That's the short answer, is it's a guess. But I'd be looking to an inner CV joint problem there, and that's what I would try. Tamer Matwali, how do you handle a stuck brake line union? I have a 2001 Fiat Uno that needed front brake lines changed. I did the right side, and when it came time for the left union, the metal brake line pipe just wouldn't undo from the rubber brake line. How do you handle this? Vice grips don't help either, and now the metal pipe nut is all rounded. I was using the correct size 11 millimeter line wrench with the job on the left side went sour. I also soaked it with WD-40, what was available, before commencing any work. WD-40 has a place, but it's not my favorite penetrating oil, but you said it's what you had available. Actually, you're better off with a mixture of automatic transmission fluid and acetone. That is like one of the best penetrants out there. But lately I've been using this stuff from Zepp that works really well. All that said, that's a tough nut. And the reason I say that is because, the first thing that you think of is heat. But then heating brake fluid inside of an enclosed area, not such a good idea. You might try heat if you disconnect the other end of the line first. That way it's not a sealed system. That way, you haven't got it under pressure and the heat won't transfer through the fluid to other places. It has some place to go, is I guess what I'm saying. So disconnect it from the caliper if you're going to heat it. It's the absolute last resort. But I've been where you are, and I understand where you are, and it's super frustrating. The only other option that you have, or another option, is if you have access to a flare tool, you can cut that metal line and try to reposition it so that if you've got enough of that line to bend and make a new flare, that might be the direction you have to go. But it's nothing that you did. This is just something that happens, especially the way those brake lines are designed. They're like on a little shelf, and all the crud and junk just sits on top of them and just waits to corrode the joint and waits for you to come and have a bad day. So it's not your fault. But heat may be the last resort, unfortunately. But I would disconnect the other end first before you go there. And be very careful, because those brake lines, those metal brake lines themselves, are very fragile. They reach a certain temperature and that's it, game over. So you have to be super careful no matter what you do. But I wish you the best of luck in that endeavor, sir. Okay, yeah, let's keep going for a little bit. Coolman 58 has a 1998 Chevy Suburban 1500 4x4 with 205,000 miles on it. While driving down the road, I'm getting an intermittent rumble coming from the front at about 70 miles per hour and a wobbling feel like it pulls back and forth in the road. Any ideas what I can start examining? Thanks for all you do. Stay dirty. It almost sounds like you're describing death wobble, which is something that's quite common with Jeeps, especially when you lift them. If your vehicle is lifted, this may be a characteristic of the vehicle, and I would look up death wobble. There's a myriad of things written on it, But sort of what you're describing sounds like it might be going in that direction. But of course, check the usual suspects, all the suspension components, things like that. Make sure that they're all tight, wonderful, and solid. Because if they aren't, well, that can exacerbate a situation. Remember I said earlier, they don't cause vibrations, but they can exacerbate them. So yeah, definitely look for your loose suspension components. 70 miles an hour is a little fast for a tire balance issue, but it's not going to hurt to rule that out by having the tires balanced or by rotating them. Something you might just try, just for the heck of it, is rotating the tires front to back and see if the condition changes or goes away. If it does, then you can suspect something with those tires or wheels that you had on the front. It's basic logic, step-by-step stuff. But yeah, I would also just look into death wobble as a possibility there, especially if you've lifted it. Austin Strand, hello Eric. In a previous show, I asked for tips on driving a stick. Here's another question along the same line. Am I hurting anything if I skip a gear? If so, how bad would it be? How damaging would it be? An example of this would be entering a highway from a ramp where third is appropriate. When using third to get up to 60, 100 metric stuff. Then shifting directly into fifth. So in other words, shifting from third to fifth gear is what your question is. Is that bad? It's not going to hurt anything, okay? However, if you put the engine in too low a gear, it's what's called lugging the engine, or too high a gear too soon, is what I meant to say. So if you put the engine in too high a gear too soon, it's doing what's called lugging the engine. So the engine is not necessarily in a place to where it's producing its optimum amount of power. It's kind of trying to catch up. Think of a 10-speed bike, and you start off from a dead stop in 10th gear. You know, you have to work a lot harder than you do if you start off in first gear. Same thing is true with your transmission. So what gear you're in is not necessarily harmful, but you can cause the engine not to work as well. So, you know, drive it, see if it does have an adverse effect. I don't believe it will. I mean, the engine just works in its own RPM range. The transmission is just whatever gear you put it in. It's not like they know each other. But if the engine's complaining as you're doing this, if the engine starts to bog down when you do it, don't you hit fourth. It's not that difficult. All right. Christopher Maltius, how many miles do tires usually last? I got some Firestones last summer, and they will be pretty much done by the end of the season. I've done approximately 30,000 kilometers with them. That can't be right. I did my rotation every oil change since I got them. It can be right, Christopher. It depends on how you drive, and it depends on the type of tire. There's a gajillion things that go into this. Tires that traditionally have more traction don't last as long. It's just physics. There's give and take to everything. Also, if you drive in a spirited manner, and especially when cornering, those tires will not last as long as tires that are driven nicely. So tires last as long as they get driven well, or what. You know what? I really can't say, because that's a tough question to answer, other than it depends on how you drive, depends on the type of tires. It also depends on the vehicle, because the suspension design of the vehicle also comes into play. I've done a video about tires in the past and saying that, you know, earlier, the guy with the Honda talking about putting cheap tires on that. That's, in my opinion, not the way to go. I just put brand new Michelins on my $500 Acura Vigor, 93 Acura Vigor. I spent $500 for the car, and I spent about $540 on the tires. Worth every penny. Every penny. That car rides like it's on a cloud, handles great. I spent the extra money on the tires, and I'm not disappointed. I've never been disappointed by spending money on good tires. It always comes back. So do some research, see what you can find out at TireRack.com. They do a lot of good research for you so that you don't have to deal with a lot of that. Now, we're getting towards the end here. Okay, Peter Capica, and he's been complaining because he can't get on the website, so I'll answer his question. Hey, Eric, how much Lysol does it take to remove something in the car smell? It just so happens, Peter, that I've done a video about this very thing in my old Subaru that used to be owned by a dog, or herd of dogs, actually. And I had to get the smell out. So I've done a video about that very thing. And there are several different methods and several things that you could try. They're all covered in that video and linked. I'll put a link in the description to that, right, that video, so that you can check that out directly. Colin Donovan, 2002 Camry, 140,000 miles. I hear a random clicking noise inside the car. I can't figure out what it is. The clicks on and off 3 times in a row. It mostly does it upon startup. Know where I can look first. It sounds like it's coming from the dashboard or something. Maybe normal. Well, it may be normal, sort of. I think that vehicle is equipped with a small fan inside the dash that actually draws in some of the cabin air for the climate control system. So just try turning the climate control off and see if that noise is still there. And if it's gone, then it probably has something to do with the climate control, either the doors moving on the inside, or possibly I've heard noisy fans before, and they get clogged up with gook and that kind of thing. But they're there to draw in some of the cabin air so that it can get an accurate measurement of the cabin air temperature. And sometimes they might get knocked around, or just, like I say, get clogged up with junk and cause a noise. So that may be what you're dealing with. Oh, somebody complaining because they didn't get a reply on the forum. Yeah, it's a busy forum, man. We try to help where we can. Okay, Matthew Torres. Hey, Eric, I'm getting my first stick shift car, and I was wondering what your opinion on a GTI 2000s, Honda hatchback, EG or EK, or BMW E30. Looking for something reliable, overall good. Average car to the point A to point B, MPG is a plus, thanks. You should do a collab with Scotty Kilmer. I've actually asked Scotty Kilmer about doing a collab. Scotty Kilmer doesn't do collabs. He just doesn't. He just said it outright that he prefers to work alone. I respect that. I mean, come on, you got to respect the guy. I mean, he pretty much started YouTube repair videos. But anyway, that being said, I'm not going to sit here and tell you what car to buy. It's just not my style. What I tell you is I don't care if it's the best car in the world. If it gets owned by the wrong person and they abuse it and all that kind of thing, it's not going to be long for this world. It's just the way it is. Anytime you're considering a used car purchase, I recommend a used car inspection, preferably by somebody who is familiar with the brand of vehicle that you're looking to purchase. They're usually privy to all the little nuances and things to look for with an inspection of that type. So that's what I recommend. I don't recommend one particular brand. I get asked about what used car to buy all the time, and I have actually written on my FAQ page a whole thing about used car inspections. Done a 4-part series video on that, and that's what I recommend you watch and use that information to try to help you. Michael Stackstein, sorry. Hey, Eric, looking to replace the struts on my brother's 2006 Honda Pilot EX 4-wheel drive, which is just shy of 170,000 miles. Sometime down the road, possibly near future, I was wondering if you think it's worth buying Honda struts or something like KYB or Monroe quick struts. I like the way Honda struts ride as much as you do, but of course they are not. They're a lot more expensive than the aftermarket brands. Any input would be greatly appreciated. You already answered your own question, man. What did I put on mine? Yep, that's right. I spent the extra money. What did I just talk about with tires? Same kind of thing with the suspension. I've used the other suspension components that you've mentioned. They work, but do they work as well as the original equipment stuff? Not in my opinion, they don't. Ride quality is vastly different than it is with original equipment stuff. Going back to that 93 Vigor, what kind of parts did I buy for that? That's a $500 car. If anything that I should save money on, it should be that car. I didn't. So I could be either a fool for doing that, or maybe, I don't know. I'm not going to say that I'm anything other than fool. I'll leave that for you to decide. I'm going to do one more. Let's see. All right. Well, why don't we just do the last person that posted a question, just to give them. Daniel Thomasine. I am from Norway, and we mostly drive stick cars. Skipping gear will not hurt the engine as long as you. Oh, so he's answering the other question that I answered earlier and said the same thing. It's not going to hurt anything. Okay. I actually just want to say this. Frodo Baggy Balls. Hey, Eric, sometimes when I turn off my car for a bit, like 1 to 5 minutes, and then try to start it up, nothing happens, no crank, etc. But after a few minutes and turning the key works, battery is brand new, terminals are clean and well connected. This only happens right after my car has been running. It will always start fine in the morning, and I've driven the car for a short period of time. Do you suspect a failing starter? Okay, so turn it off, start it up, nothing happens, no crank. Is there a click is my question. If there's a click and there's no crank, then I would say definitely look towards that starter. You've covered all the bases with the battery and the battery terminals. That's the first thing to check. So you've already covered that. So the next thing to look at is the starter itself. I've actually got a video about starter diagnosis. Yeah. I would say look to the starter in that instance, and you can use that video to help guide you to check the voltage drops and everything across the board to fully confirm that that is indeed the issue that we're having. And with that, I'm going to wrap this up. That was pretty funny. I like that username. Anyway, if I did not get to your question during this episode, I apologize for that. I did my best to answer as many of these as possible, but you know, hey, that's how it is. As mentioned earlier, I will not be answering the questions posted to the YouTube video. Also will not be catching the questions that are posted after this event concludes to the Google Plus event, so apologies. There will be a link in the description to my Google Plus page, and we'll be doing this again in 2 weeks, which I don't know what date that is because my calendar is at the end of September. So sometime in October, we'll be, I'm guessing second week of October, second Wednesday of October, we'll be doing this again. Once again, EricTheCarGuy.com, always there for you and faster than ever. You should go check it out. It's kind of awesome now. And there will be links in the description to additional information and blah, 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 blah. But I hope this has been as entertaining for you as it has been for me. And I hope in some way that I was informative to you. I want to thank you for watching. If you wish to connect with me socially, I can be found on Google+, Facebook, Twitter, also Instagram, and I close each of my videos with be safe, have fun, and stay dirty. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. 2 weeks.